Hello, this is Dawn Atanasio at GW Law School. I want to welcome all of you, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our next panel, which will discuss how we reach out to our students and our workforce on educational opportunities. Leading our panel today, we will have Larry Brown. Larry is a professorial lecturer at law here at GW. We mentioned at the beginning of this program that we've actually had an atomic energy law course of some sort since the 1950s, but Larry came to us, well over a dozen years ago now, and revitalized this with a program focused on energy, nuclear energy as an energy source, and made it an integral part of our energy law curriculum. He brings with him 40 years of experience and was an appointee in both the Bush and Obama administrations, demonstrating his capabilities as a trusted advisor. So with that, Larry, let me turn this panel over to you.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the previous discussions. I certainly have. I share the same tie that Peter Wolf, the chairman of the last panel, had on. But I'd like to begin by following up on and expand on some of the comments by Dan Stringer and Commissioner Burns. George Washington University has been at the forefront of nuclear energy since its very beginning. And I should say, a full disclosure, what I'm about to say may suggest otherwise, but I am not a George Washington University alumni. The world's first learned about the potential of atomic energy at George Washington University in 1939. Dan mentioned the plaque commemorating the event. It happened on the same city block where the law school is currently located, at the 5th Washington Conference on Theoretical Physics. Standing in the law school quad, you were looking at the back of a building that was then the Hall of Government. Professors George Gamow and Edward Teller, both recent immigrants from Europe, had organized a conference on low temperature physics and superconductivity. However, one of the attendees and also a conference speaker was Nobel laureate Niels Bohr. He reported that he had recently received a telegram from chemists in Berlin informing him of an experiment that had successfully split an atom of uranium-235. The news changed the entire focus of the conference. And it would probably be months before it became public if the achievement had been confined to scientific journals. Instead, Thomas Henry, a reporter from the Washington Evening Star, had become fascinated with science and decided to, quote, drop over to the Theoretical Physics Conference. He sat down in the classroom amongst 24 other participants, a relatively small group, I would say, and observed Niels Bohr and another Nobel laureate, Enrico Fermi, beside the blackboard. Then Bohr gave his report. Henry did not file his story immediately. He waited 2 days until after an experiment confirmed the results at the Carnegie Institute's Department of Terrestrial Magnetism in Rock Creek Park here in DC. Henry's story was front page news under the headline, "Power of New Atomic Blast Greatest Achieved on Earth." Based upon Henry's article, the Associated Press released a dispatch which then appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and Newsweek magazine. By April of that year, 1939, the American Physical Society, the Washington Post, Life magazine, Scientific American, and others had joined the chorus with headlines like, "Power may send huge vessels across the seas," "Vision Earth rocked by isotope blasts," "Incomparable promise or awful threat." Active discussion of the implications of atomic energy continued in the press until the summer of 1941, when the government imposed censorship and press coverage of the subject and of the government's secret research program that we all are familiar with. It all began on the campus of George Washington University. Also, Commissioner Burns mentioned, and so did Donna at the beginning of this panel, the start that GW Law School has a long history of studying atomic or nuclear law. In the year 2000, George Washington University celebrated 50 years of environmental and energy law programs. Some of you that attended may have one of these nice pins that celebrates that 50-year anniversary. Folks at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission have recounted to me how several of their staff over these many years have been adjunct at GW. One of them, Harold P. Green, joined the staff of the Atomic Energy Commission in 1954, was a partner of the Washington law firm Fried, Frank, Harris, Shraver, and Kampelman from 1961 to 1983, and then he joined the faculty of the George Washington University Law School in 1964, where he taught law classes in constitutional law, science, and technology issues until he retired in 1992. Green's book, Government of the Atom, well, which I have one of the very few copies of, explored the relationship between the Atomic Energy Commission and the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. For those history buffs, that's a fascinating political history. In 2011, I wrote a syllabus for a course in atomic energy law. At the time, GW was revamping the environment and energy programs and added my course to the curriculum. The course is a primer. There are no prerequisites. It is intended to familiarize students with the law and literature related to atomic energy. It is, as they say, a seamless web of legal issues. A skilled practitioner knows the basics: litigation, administrative law, environmental law, regulatory law, export-import law, medical, transportation, insurance, international. The list goes on, including constitution and even criminal law. Of course, you don't need a course in nuclear law to be an effective lawyer. I recently met a young woman that had graduated from GW Law that had not taken my course, unfortunately, but is the general counsel for a nuclear startup company here in DC. The primer course helps, if for no other reason than to familiarize individuals having their bachelor's degree in history, sociology, even engineering, to the terminology and the concepts in nuclear field. Professor Allison McFarland, former NRC chairman, said shortly after arriving at the NRC that, quote, if Nuclear Regulatory Commission documents are going to continue to be so full of hard to understand acronyms, they should all begin with an LOA. She had to explain later that LOA meant list of acronyms. And a judge at the DC Circuit admonished the lawyers on both sides for their use of acronyms in the waste feed case, footnote 1, quote, we also remind the parties that our handbook of practice and international procedures states that parties are strongly urged to limit the use of acronyms and should avoid using acronyms that are not widely known. Here, both parties abandoned any attempt to write in plain English, instead abbreviating every conceivable agency and statute involved, familiar or not, and littering their briefs with references to SNF, HLW, NWF, NWPA, and BRC. Now, piling on to its academic complexity, nuclear materials and technologies are highly regulated, probably the most highly regulated of any commercial activity. And the list of regulations is constantly increasing. Between 1976 and 2006, the number of pages of NRC regulations increased from 450 to 1,600 pages. New state and federal policy, new state and federal law, executive orders, court cases are constantly changing the administrative landscape. As it has been mentioned in earlier panels, commercial success requires not only mature and marketable technologies, but someone that can navigate the law and regulation and manage the process necessary to achieve results. An anecdote I heard recently was sort of related to this subject. A small company was seeking an NRC license, or had submitted their license application, and it was being processed. But then they entered merger negotiations, and the president of the company called the NRC and said, can you please pause our license application during these merger discussions, because we need to make sure we get this completed. He was told, well, come over to the NRC and we'll discuss it. When he got there, he was escorted to a conference room with 30 NRC staff attendees. 4 hours of discussion followed. He later received a bill for $50,000 because applicants for an NRC license must pay the hourly rate for NRC staff. And that was a surprise to him that he got such a big bill for what he thought was a pretty simple question. Our panel today is on teaching students the future workforce. Over the last 3 days, you've discussed the benefits and advantages of various technologies for producing energy, principally electricity. Our panelists have now been asked to discuss approaches needed to attract, stimulate, and train students, i.e. the next generation workforce, for work in the nuclear energy sector, how the students are influenced either positively or negatively by either the presentation of material or more subtle factors within the course content. We have 3 distinguished panelists, each with a long list of achievements. A link to their biography should show up in your chat box here during the conference, but it's also on the initial web page. Ms. Kimberly Nick is the head of the Division of Nuclear Law at the Nuclear Energy Agency of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. Rama Panangi, lawyer trained in India and currently working on his LLM as a GW Merit Scholar and Randolph Shaw Environmental Fellow. And Professor Christopher Cahill, chairman of GW Chemistry Department. Now, he will try and wrap up what the other 3 lawyers on the panel have focused on and expand our vision a bit. So we're going to start with Kimberly Nick. Thank you very much for being here. And Kimberly, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Larry. And it is my absolute pleasure to be here with you all today. I will actually say good afternoon to everyone, or even good evening, because I'm joining you here from Paris, where it's actually 6 o'clock at night right now. Thank you very much to Donna and to Rama for inviting me to be here with you all today to discuss a topic that is quite near and dear to my heart, which is educating students, lawyers, policymakers, scientists, and engineers in nuclear law. Just as a bit of background, the Nuclear Energy Agency has 2 goals in the area of nuclear law. First, to create sound national and international legal regimes required for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And second, and very germane to this topic, to serve as a leading center for nuclear law information and education. And we take that charge quite seriously. Over 20 years ago now, the NEA started on a journey in teaching international nuclear law that I don't think anyone at the time imagined would still be going on today, stronger and more vibrant than ever. Our previous head of legal affairs at the NEA, Patrick Rainers, saw the inevitable aging of a skilled technical personnel at nuclear organizations, which raised concern about its eventual impact on the safety of nuclear installations. While slightly different, this phenomenon was also experienced in connection with the replacement of a generation of lawyers specialized in nuclear law, raising the issue of knowledge transfer in this discipline. As he explained it, the International Nuclear Law Association held up the flame, but was at pains to attract young lawyers. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that education in nuclear law was, even in active nuclear countries, practically non-existent. Universities were largely disinterested, and nuclear institutions, both public and private, did not have the vocation to fill the gap. So with the support of NEA management, a close inner circle of friends and colleagues at the IAEA, and enthusiastic support from the University of Montpellier, the International School of Nuclear Law was born, holding its first program in 2001. 22 years later, 20 programs and over 1,100 participants from over 110 countries, the ISNL remains the preeminent program for learning about the legal issues related to safe, efficient, and secure use of nuclear energy. So you've heard a few people mention it already. So what exactly is the ISNL? The ISNL is a 2-week educational program held every summer in the south of France in cooperation with the University of Montpellier. It is not a terrible place to spend 2 weeks every year. We have approximately 60 participants joining us, 25% of whom are LLM, JD, and PhD students, and 75% of whom are professionals. Not everyone is a lawyer, and we have a number of brave engineers, scientists, and policymakers joining us for the program who like to learn about nuclear law and give all of the lawyers a hard time. These 60 participants come from all over the world, generally from about 30 countries each year. We strive for diversity in gender, nationality, occupation, background, among numerous other factors. We have found that the more diverse our participant list is, the better the quality of dialogue and information exchange we have. These 60 participants are selected from a rigorous application process. We average about 130 applications each year, so we're able to put together a great group of really excited individuals. The program is a full day each day of the 2 weeks and includes lectures, workshops, and panel discussions. Our lecturers are renowned specialists in nuclear law, particularly from international organizations, government agencies, academic circles, and the nuclear industry, including the insurance sector. Since 2001, over 100 different lecturers from all over the world have taught at the ISNL. And you've already had the opportunity to hear from a few of them this week, including Lisa Teal and former NRC Chairman Burns. Now, at the conclusion of each ISNL, participants have the opportunity to apply for a university diploma in international nuclear law delivered from the University of Montpellier. The evaluation includes active class participation, a multiple choice test, and a dissertation of publishable quality. Now, one of the strengths of the ISNL is that the community does not end with the program. The relationships that the participants make during their 2 weeks in Montpellier last well beyond their time in the south of France, creating real bonds. Seems that no matter where I go around the world, I have people coming up to me telling me about their times in Montpellier, about how wonderful it was, and just desperately wishing that they could go back. And I know that that is an experience that most of our other lecturers have. Now, for the past 8 years, my dear friend Paul Bowden and I have been leading the ISNL, as well as its sister programs, the International Nuclear Law Essentials and the Fundamentals of International Nuclear Law. So I have spent a lot of time thinking about and discussing how to teach the subject of nuclear energy law. And I'll highlight 3 key features of any successful education program in this area. So first, I think it's truly critical that we use a holistic approach. It's very simple to take the IAEA's 3S plus approach, looking at the safety, security, safeguards, and liability, and teach each of those as a standalone topic. So it's more challenging, but also more effective to ensure that each concept is put into perspective, showing the interconnected nature of each of these areas. We go to great lengths to teach these connections and the symbiotic nature of each element. They build on and inform one another rather than existing in their own independent silos. Now, just like Larry, who started this all off with a history lesson, I tend to try to frame everything myself in history because it really is a continuum. Things happen as they do for certain reasons, and I think it really helps the participants to understand how things developed over time. It puts it into context. Second, I found that international nuclear law remains an opaque practice area if it isn't framed by national law. And this is where we can get into a bit of a debate at the ISNL about hard law versus soft law in an international context, but it's a great debate to have. And it shows how the transposition of international nuclear law happens in regional and national levels. Third, we need a balance that is struck between the theoretical underpinnings of international nuclear law and the international nuclear law in practice. One can only truly understand the theory once they see how it's applied in practice. So if you take, for example, the Convention on Nuclear Safety, it contains broad objectives and obligations, but what does that really mean for a nuclear lawyer at the IAEA, which is the depository of the convention, and lawyers at nuclear regulatory bodies and national governments? How does it impact their day-to-day work? We have to be able to balance both the theory and the practice for people to really get it. So what I found is that the most successful lecturers that we have at our educational program are the people who get the big picture. They understand how safety, security, safeguards, and liability are all part of the same framework, and that the key instruments and agreements in these areas did not develop in a vacuum. They were or are practitioners and can provide personal experiences to supplement the academic portions of their lectures. They know the national laws and regulations, so they can give details about how international hard law and soft law influence the legal and regulatory framework in their country. And I will add that there's a fourth element, but this isn't something that can be learned, and it's certainly not something that you can just develop on your own. It's passion, or as Garrett mentioned earlier, infectious enthusiasm. Okay, this is not a Nobel Prize winning discovery to say this, but I sometimes spend a month or more a year teaching nuclear law and sitting in on nuclear law courses in countries all around the world. I first met Rama in India, okay? So I've been around and I've seen a lot of different approaches. When a teacher has passion for the subject, you can see them ignite a spark in the person who's listening. It almost doesn't matter if that lecturer is the smartest, most accomplished person in the subject area that they're teaching. If they can't connect with the audience, they'll never pique their curiosity to learn more. And that's what I always tell students, that they need to be successful in this field. They need to be curious. Okay? Because we can be honest here, nuclear law is a niche subject. So you've got to be curious to want to dive in here. You don't find a lot of nuclear lawyers out there, maybe in Washington, but certainly not in the rest of the world. Encouraging students or early to mid-career professionals to enter this field, especially when the future is uncertain, is not easy. The fact that the subject is hardly taught anywhere in any JD or LLM programs, GW being an obvious exception, doesn't help matters. However, times may be starting to feel different. For a couple of years now, we've all been trying to determine whether we are actually on the verge of a nuclear renaissance. So I entered this field during the previous renaissance. And at that time, law firms and companies were desperate to hire anyone who could even pronounce the word nuclear. We're definitely not at that place now, but if any of these small modular reactors and new technologies are going to actually be successful, we'll need a steady supply of knowledgeable nuclear lawyers to help these companies navigate a complex terrain in one of the most highly regulated fields in the world. Education is critical to this. So my final point is this. We need to find a way to get nuclear law taught, at the very least, as a module or seminar in LLM programs for energy and environmental law. From where I sit as not only the head of the Division of Nuclear Law for an international organization, but also as a leader of the education and publication programs, I field a fair amount of inquiries from people about where they can go to learn more after our programs. There are a lot of students and professionals out there who not only want our diploma, but they also want an LLM or PhD in nuclear law. But I don't have a lot of great answers for them. In my opinion, there's no better subject to bring together so many different types of law at one time. In the teaching of international nuclear law, you are also teaching public international law, administrative law, environmental law, contract law, and nuclear science, among other areas. What could be more dynamic or interesting than this? You don't have to take my word for it. One of our other panelists, Rama, is an ISNL graduate, so he can tell you firsthand whether or not we're successful in our mission. Now, before I close, I'll just note that if you are interested in learning more, a few months ago, we released what we consider to be the key book on this topic, Principles and Practices of International Nuclear Law. With 25 different authors representing the NEA, the IAEA, the European Commission, leading nuclear regulatory agencies, government authorities, academia, and private practice, this book brings together many of today's leading experts in the field of international nuclear law. The book contains 6 chapters, 19 articles covering the legal aspects of radiological protection, nuclear safety, environmental protection, nuclear transport, nuclear security, safeguards, third-party liability, insurance, trade, and project development. Most of the authors are either current or former lecturers at the ISNL, and the book is available for free online, and it is not a thin book. So I'll put some links in the chat for those of you who are interested, and I very much appreciate being here with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. That was fantastic. There's so much to unpack there. I'm stumbling where to start, but I'm glad you pointed out your book, which was, I believe, just published in March, and it's free on the internet right now. You can download it. I have. So I would encourage everybody to do that, because as we've said, it's a seamless web, the impact in all sorts of areas of law and policy. So next we're going to hear from Rama Panangi. He is a student here, and he's going to give us his perspective. So Rama, over to you.
Thank you very much, Larry. It's always tough to follow up after your teacher and mentor, but let's see how this goes. So now that Kimberly has given us a broad perspective of an international nuclear law perspective, I will be talking about it from a narrow, from a student perspective of my recent experience. So as Kimberly mentioned, I have attended the International School of Nuclear Law. I had wonderful experience. I will certify each thing that Kimberly mentioned, and it's still one of the best experiences of my life. There are similar courses that I've attended in Nuclear Law Institute, IAEA. Nationally, I've chosen to come to GW because it is one of the very few courses that teaches atomic energy law. As Judy mentioned earlier in her speech, that NIA is going to conduct a nuclear innovation bootcamp that is from the 1st of August. The applications are still open. I would encourage everyone to register for it if they're interested. But the main point that I was about to make is these courses are very popular within the nuclear sector, but are niche, very niche otherwise. According to me, nuclear energy, law, and policy subjects must be as accessible as probably nuclear engineering is. We need them to be included in energy, environmental, and climate change courses, be it law or management. If you look around, barring few exceptions, this is not popular among many universities. There aren't many universities that teach nuclear energy, law, and policy as subjects as part of their energy and environmental studies. And even in the courses that do include nuclear, we need to make sure that they're taught in a similar fashion as other sources of energy, especially clean energy sources are taught. For example, when it comes to nuclear law, we can start by explaining the basic science of atomic energy, the splitting of the atom. With that appreciation of the technology, we can explain why is it important, what is nuclear law, what is on atomic energy law. We can go into the connection of the interlinkage of 3 S's, as Kimberly mentioned, about safety, security, and safeguards. And then we can hop on to the drawbacks regarding nuclear incidents and liability, environmental justice aspects. But the reason why this topic is very important to me is because of the recent experience of me taking a course of energy and regulation, where we discuss various sources of energy and their regulatory laws and how they're regulated with the state, federal, etc. But as soon as we came to nuclear, the first aspect, the first major topic we started discussing is from the perspective of accidents. I think even if there is no bias while teaching those subjects, it does project some kind of a bias against nuclear. And I think as Greg Lamar also pointed out that academia has least support from nuclear energy. He did point out from the perspective of trust on safety regulators, but I think we can translate that towards nuclear energy because of the branding it has, and the branding that renewable energy has on academia. I think that these aspects can be changed and improved if we can maybe sought help from NEA, IEA because of their vast experience in this field of teaching subject. I think NEA also has established a global forum for nuclear education, science, technology, and policy in 2021. But I think this is more linked to technology development. But if that can be expanded, that'll be fantastic. Uh, because why I also mentioned about this particular class I attended is because students, this can be the first time, this can be the introduction for students into nuclear energy and law. And with this perspective of access of teaching different sources of energy one way and nuclear in another way can probably have a negative impact or a preconceived notion about the subject. If you see that renewable energy has tremendous impact on students, tremendous marketing and branding, and students are at the forefront of climate change, and you see them more supportive of renewable energy. This might be because of the funding opportunities that renewable energy has created for universities and academia. We also heard from Dr. Lane Karasik, who was there on the first day of the panel on environmental justice aspects. He said, although there are several aspects interested that he would be ready to work on, there is not enough. Academia works on funding and not by topics of interest for the industry. So I think that industry needs to take active funding opportunities towards academia so that they can increase acceptability in academics, not only for research, but also for academic courses, so that students can help increase the acceptance for nuclear energy. Yesterday in one of the working groups, Adam Rodman had mentioned that education has to be situated at the forefront of the branding of nuclear. I think students have tremendous potential to increase the acceptance of nuclear energy, provided that it is taught with the flow of accurate information. And if this is continued, then nuclear will have a better future, will continue its future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rama. I should also point out that I believe the IAEA just had a 1-week conference on nuclear law. Spent a whole week talking on it. They had invited lots of people there. We have a question from Ms. Holland. Can you share the syllabus with us? I'll try and get that to you separately. And another question from an anonymous person: are there ways to integrate nuclear law into other law school curriculums? The way is to get the faculty to adopt it and hire professors like Miss Nick, who would be an incredible addition to any law school faculty. Let's see. We have next the man who's going to integrate this into the real world, and to the majority of people who are students in our university. So I'll just turn it over to Chris, and Chris, if you take it away, please.
Okay, thanks. Let me got some screen sharing to do here, so let's make sure that's working, and hopefully you all can see a slide in just a moment. Okay. Yeah, so can you see the slides? Yeah. Okay, great. So thanks very much for having me. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the a view from the trenches, if you will. I hadn't realized we were going to get such a lovely introduction to GW's place in this arena and contributions. And now I feel like I'm going to continue that a little bit by articulating some of the things that we do here. I will try to make some comments, though, however, that are generic or widely applicable across universities and reflective of some of the challenges and opportunities in this space with respect to education, and to articulate those by way of example of what we are doing at GW. So I'm a professor of chemistry and international affairs, and that's a weird title, I know. The origin of that second title is that I have a kind of a keen interest in the intersection and the interface of science and technology policy. And my interests as a scientist are down here in this part of the periodic table, and uranium and plutonium, as we all know about, and their roles of nuclear energy and, of course, nuclear weapons. And that's where my science is. And my science is also very much informed by policy decisions. What are the technical needs? Well, they're responding to some policy concepts or policy revisions and edicts from on high. And also we inform those policy decisions and developments based on the technological and scientific progress that we make and things that we learn. And Larry gave us a fantastic example of that very early. So fission gets reported at a conference, and then quite frankly, the landscape of policy changed forever from that moment on. Interestingly, my office before moving to this building was in the same office as Gamow, so that was an exciting connection to make as well. But look, in this space of science and technology policy here, what I wanted to articulate, which I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but to help set up the context for how I'm working on this, these two communities don't communicate with one another very effectively. They're not calibrated to each other's perspectives. This landscape too is full of complexities, legal, technical, all sorts of things, sociological. We've seen a lot of discussion of that today as well. There's also a fair amount of hubris and naivete on both sides. And that's a sort of a mix that's ripe for not getting where we need to go to sort of, move forward in terms of expanding nuclear technology and implementation thereof. And I should also say that I'm not necessarily pro-nuke. I am somewhat nuclear agnostic, although I am a big fan of nuclear energy. I tend to be more pro-nuclear safety, security, and sanity. And in my courses, what I'm trying to do is to develop critical thinking and empower people to be effective players in this space and make their own decisions as to how they want to contribute in this landscape. So my goals really are twofold, and that's to develop a modicum of technical understanding in policy people. And at GW, we've got an awful lot of policy people in our Elliott School of International Affairs and elsewhere. And on the next slide, I'll tell you what I'm doing about that. But then I want to turn that around and develop a policy cognizance in STEM folks. My own part of the periodic table speaks largely to the need for folks to be aware of how policy influences where we're going scientifically or the funding landscape and that sort of thing. But that's valid for anywhere, any scientific discipline, to understand what the societal needs are and how policies and norms are helping to shape funding directions or what challenges need to get pursued is a good place to be, I think, as a scientist to help put your work into context. Curriculum developments at George Washington, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has supported this in the past. I received a grant a number of years ago from the USNRC to develop two new courses at GW, one of which was the Science of Nuclear Materials, and the second was Nuclear Safeguards and Forensics. Speaking mostly about the first one, these were modular laboratory-based courses designed for non-scientists. And by non-scientists, I mean, these are master's students in the Elliott School, Security Policy Studies, Nuclear Policy Studies, these sorts of things. Number of GW Law students have taken the course as well. But the assumption is no science since high school. I like to call it a safe space for the policy community because we deliver the content patiently and didactically, and recognizing that folks' scientific backgrounds are diverse. No judgment. Let's just sort of get everyone comes in saying, I can't do math. I'll get you to do math. Don't worry. And we tackle some tough science gently and informedly and relevantly. We sometimes refer to the course as Science for Suits. It's a night course, and folks come to the course right from work, often at their lanyards still on from the office. And we get to work on atomic structure, fission, weapons, energy production, you name it, we do it. And this is a hands-on course. So for many folks, this is their first exposure to handling a Geiger counter or handling radioactive material. This is just a shot off the web of some of the equipment we use, but we have folks handling uranium ore and doing gamma spectroscopy on it and finding out all sorts of things about fission products and decay products. This has been a grand success. We've got alumni all over the nuclear arena. We've got folks at NNSA, NRC, DOE, some intelligence community folks, State Department, IAEA, and various contractors. So it's been a good course for a number of years. Perhaps the resounding, or I hope you can all see this at the bottom, but on the course evaluation, I asked, did you find this course relevant for your career goals? And this has made me the happiest I think I've ever been. As a policy person, I found that the engineers I work with already respect me more due to my increased technical literacy. Boom, that's all we need to hear. But I do want to turn this around a little bit because as a scientist, I rose to this challenge of developing this technical understanding or technical literacy amongst the policy folks, thinking I was going to right every wrong, and if we could just teach these policy folks a little bit about nuclear fission, we'll get somewhere. And oh boy, was I wrong. I actually had this turned around to me considerably, and it was pointed out very obviously that I just had zero understanding of policy. And my perspective was very narrow, and if something was physically possible, then you should do it. I didn't have an appreciation for the complexity of the nuclear arena. So I got to work on trying to fix that. Did a fellowship, American Institute of Physics State Department Science Fellow at the State Department, working on nuclear forensics policy and the like. So I tried to develop my policy chops. And around the time I was getting up to speed on that, GW partnered up with the Nuclear Science and Security Consortium out of UC Berkeley, where we got a sub-award to run our nuclear security policy boot camp. Now, this was admittedly a little bit weapons heavy, but another complexity of the nuclear enterprise, energy and weapons, is the exact same fission. Nevertheless, what the target audience here was a STEM PhD student. So let's do a 2-week crash course on nuclear policy and turn that around and enlighten the STEM folks as to the complexity of the enterprise, the challenge, the opportunities, and the career opportunities. I'll show another picture or two, but this was on day 10 of a field trip to the State Department in the Hall of Flags, where we participated in a tabletop exercise and some panel discussions with some weapons of mass destruction, terrorism folks. But throughout the boot camp, we were looking also at nuclear energy, uranium enrichment, some of the big players. Whoa, geez, where'd that go? Some of the big players in the field, Frank von Hippel, of course, and Sharon Sconey, who's here at GW, and then some other activities, including a field trip to the NRC Ops Center. And there's a photo from in front of that. This year's, or I should say last year's, boot camp looks a little bit different because we had the move to being online, but nevertheless, we are still hard at work at what I would consider sort of a dual-pronged approach. During the academic year, we're working hard to develop this technical understanding to our GW students. And during the summer, we welcome folks from all over the world to do the inverse of that, which is to develop the policy cognizance amongst the STEM community. So with those two activities, both of which have been supported by federal agencies, we're hoping to get somewhere on that front. And as this week has pointed out, and as this panel has pointed out, there's plenty of work to be done, and the level of complexity therein is completely non-trivial, but as educators, we peck away at it as we can. So thanks for that, and you'll look forward to any questions or panel discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I would point out that our chat room is where we ask for questions, or the Q&A. I'm watching both. And we really appreciate your questions. The questions and discussions in previous panels have been superb in really bringing out the issues people are interested in. A couple of questions that are probably best answered separately, but all right, well, I see they've been answered. One was, can you share contact information for the speakers? I see that our speakers have already done that in the chat column. Certainly, if you have any questions after the conference, I know I always think of things after the conference I wish I had asked. You can reach out to me. I hope GW will provide my email address to the conference participants, and I will do my best to answer or fulfill your interest. One of the things that occurred to me is, say again?
A question just showed up in the Q&A if you're tracking.
All right, let's see. What respects of nuclear law and policy should be known by nuclear engineering and nuclear engineering accident students and early career professionals? What aspects of nuclear law and policy? That's a big question. Does any of our panelists want to take that on?
I can start and give you the worst kind of lawyer answer ever and say it depends. There's so much out there, and what I have found, certainly in the applications that I've received from nuclear engineering and nuclear engineering adjacent students, is that their interests really do vary, and it tends to be quite specific to what they're working on at the moment. But mostly, they want to know about just laws in general. What does it mean? How do you make a law? What does it mean for an IAEA convention or a UN treaty? How does that then get translated down into a national experience? And from a very, very practical perspective, what is it about the law that they need to know for their everyday life? And that's one of the things that we try very hard, like I said, with the practical teaching in our courses, is what do people need to know for their everyday life? And so actually one of the things that I look at when I'm trying to determine whether to admit an engineering or science-based applicant is, how will this course actually impact them? And from a very honest perspective, a lot of people, you don't actually see the impact of our kind of program on a traditional nuclear engineer. That being said, there are a lot of them who really could benefit from understanding how the law works, and that there is a role for nuclear lawyers to play in the process. I tend to find a lot of engineers who think, well, I know how to read, so therefore I understand the law. And so understanding that it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. We do go to 3 years of law school and take a bar exam. So hopefully we bring some additional extra knowledge to the table on that. But So a long-winded answer saying it depends, but it's also just really understanding what it means to read and understand and put into practice legal requirements and regulations.
Chris,
Yeah,
Rama?
I could dovetail on that, following up with some of the policy comments for law, and but a comment that Kim just made about the how does something translate to a national experience. That's I wished I'd known that phrase earlier, but that's because we get a similar thing. The STEM folks that are taking our policy boot camp, some of them are required to be there by their funding, and then we enlighten them, but some of them are really hungry to be there. So there's a big it depends for us too. But I think what folks want to do is understand the origin of how we got where we are in terms of our international norms. Again, how laws are made and how policy is made. We do a afternoon on the budget cycle. Just quite frankly, where does funding come from? And how does Congress and the federal government make decisions? So a fair amount of folks are seeking some enlightenment, but don't know how to articulate it in the first place. Other folks are coming in hot and heavy to discuss the articles of the NPT. So it's a range, but the other thing to answer the question a little bit more specifically about elements about for folks that are going to be policy adjacent. I think if you could appreciate sort of the key milestones in policy that have gotten us where we are, that's sort of enough. And I don't mean to be glib about that, but I mean, it sort of empowers your mindset a little bit to be cognizant when the discussion goes there. You don't have to be under the hood on every single detail, but it's a completely different mindset and vocabulary for that matter. And a little bit of calibration in that regard makes you more receptive and more engaged in those conversations as they emerge.
There wouldn't be much to add to Chris and Kimberly's statements, but I think I would say that the burden is more on lawyers to understand the technology because nuclear is such a technical subject. I think the burden is more on the lawyers to know certain technical aspects of the subject than for the engineers to understand the legal aspects. I think the onus is more on us in that matter to be able to convey, to be able to interact and maintain that interface between nuclear engineers and lawyers.
Yeah, I would say the as we used to say at DOE when I was there, the devil's in the details. Kimberly mentioned, it depends on what you're trying to do. What are you talking about? Medicine, nuclear medicine, different rules, different concerns. When I first read your note, I read it as nuclear engineering accident shooting. So that's a whole another area to look into, and requires me to read more closely. But in general, if you're going to actually work in the nuclear field, nuclear safety is the bedrock that you have to begin with on an engineering or scientific basis, I think, because the materials, a nuclear accident anywhere, we used to say, is a nuclear accident everywhere. And so we need to learn the safety rules and learn what those requirements are. And those should come with any nuclear engineering or science program.
Just one final thing. I want to pick up on something that Chris said, which I think was really important. I don't think it's so much about learning a specific concept or coming away with something very direct. What really I think helps the engineers is just having awareness, yep. Knowing that this whole other universe is out there, and just having that cognizance always in their head when they're doing certain aspects of their job. What we like to talk about is widening someone's aperture, realizing that your specific area is never the only thing that exists. We sometimes in our programs give an image of an iceberg. And so often what each of us are doing in our own field is just the tip of the iceberg, and you don't even realize everything that's going on below. You know, if you're a licensing attorney at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, you're potentially only really looking at maybe, you know, a long-term operation or license renewal application, or you're looking at a new reactor application. You're maybe not concerned with materials or enforcement or looking at security aspects. You're looking at one small piece of the puzzle, but there's so much else going on underneath. And a lot of that is the same with the engineers. So by having these conversations, by having the engineers talk to the lawyers talk to the engineers, as Rama said. And I remember one of the greatest things about working at the NRC was being able to go down and have discussions with the engineers, sit down in their cubicle, and for an hour, they just tell me what's going on. And learning all of that, that made me a better lawyer. And I think it makes the engineers better engineers to have that awareness of the legal side of the house. I'll never try to do their job. They shouldn't try to do mine, but we will each do our jobs better by knowing what the other side is doing.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, as Chris showed his pictures of his students visiting State Department, it reminded me that in our course, we used to, pre-COVID, take the class out to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission Atomic Safety Licensing Board hearing room and visit there and talk to the folks about what they did, hear from the attorneys, and also we usually had a commissioner come and talk to us. So I guess in the teaching realm, I really like to get my students out into the real world that they're working in and really see if they can get their hands on the things that they will be working with when they get out into the commercial world. So let's see.
Can I have a question for Chris and Nick, Kimberly, please?
Okay.
Yeah, so I wanted to understand from you all how we can ensure that more universities have more universities are including subjects of nuclear law, or how do we ensure that there's this outreach of for the subject? How can we ensure that?
A great question, and one that I give a lot of thought to. I talk to a lot of people about it. We don't have great answers. I think one, as I like to think about it, if we build it, they will come. So what I mean when I say that is the nuclear industry needs to show that there's a need for this, because until we actually realize that there is this massive need for trained nuclear attorneys, you're not going to have the people really clamoring for this. Because right now, there's a lot of on-the-job training, right? What the ISNL does is a lot of on-the-job training. I didn't take a single course in nuclear law or energy law before I joined the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and I survived, right? Because you learn it on the job. But we had that ability to do it at the time because the NRC has a huge attorney's office, and so you have all those people who can teach it to you. But if you're starting to get into a place where you have a lot of small vendors who don't have that kind of cadre of trained people who can bring lawyers up through an honor law graduate program, then you're going to need people who, coming out of law school, have some kind of training or have some kind of awareness of these issues. So first, you have to create a market. Second, you have to have actual people who can teach the courses. And there's probably not a lot of folks out there who can do that. Most of the folks have full-time jobs. So you're going to have them as adjunct professors, which is fine and great, because then you have actual practitioners doing it. But you're going to need more people who can teach the program. You're also going to need the backing of universities to do this. You're going to need the people inside to show that there's a need and that there are students who are going to sign up for the program. So one of the things that I'm hopeful about, because I am passionate and enthusiastically optimistic about it, we created this new textbook on international nuclear law. Hopefully that is something that people can bring to their universities and say, this is an actual subject matter that can be taught. because I think there's a lot of people out there who have a bit of skepticism that nuclear law is actually a subject that merits its own course. So you have to be able to, bring some kind of proof that says, look, right here, we wrote a 500-page book on this. This is something that can be taught. So there's all of that. The IAEA announced at the end of their nuclear law conference a few weeks ago that they are actually going to start supporting a couple countries try to integrate nuclear law into their university law school curriculums. So that's just another thing where you have an international organization starting to back that. And I think that's incredibly important as well, to show that there is a market and that there is a group and big organization out there that's putting their money where their mouth is.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Kimberly. Thank you, other panelists. As a veteran of several nuclear renaissances that never came to fruition, I hope this one does, and that will generate the interest for additional technical courses, engineering courses, and legal courses. We have another session coming up rather quickly, so we're going to have to check off and move along. Thank you again for all of your participation. It's been great.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Great.
Thanks a lot.
Great to meet all of you.